today's topic will be about the planets, the planetary gods, the yokes in Celtic astrology and cosmography. So if you haven't read the chapter on planets in the book, this will probably further the discussion. The first document which we can, for antiquity, for the ancient Celtic cultural domain, draw upon is the book of Conquests by Julius Caesar here, Julius Caesar's War Commentaries, and in which he discusses the relevancy and the importance and the place of the ancient Gaelic gods in the Gaelic pantheon. But note that the gods, these principal deities are the principal deities which also represent planets. So these are the same for about any of the other Indo-European cultures where these gods are identified to planets. Of course, we think of the gods in classic Roman and Greek astrology, and also in the Vedic and Persian documents. So, such as the Vedic and the Zarathustra, the Asvestas, relative documents for the Persians, of course. So, without further ado, let's look into what Caesar had to say about the gods and the importance of the gods and their place in the Gaelic pantheon. Their principal god is Mercury, and of whom are numerous images up and down Gaul, and we can also add that this deity was highly referenced also in Celtic coinage and whatnot, especially in later Gallo-Roman sculpture. And so he's regarded as the inventor of the arts, the god who points the road and guides the traveler's footings. So this would place him as a god who is relatively close to the solar deity, as one who would accompany the solar god along the sun's course, the ecliptic. And the great patron of trade and riches. And after Mercury came Apollo. Apollo, of course, as we know, is a solar deity. He's part of the solar dynasty for many of the surrounding Indo-European cultures surrounding, let's say, the Mediterranean, as for the Greeks. And then Mars, Jupiter, and Minerva. And above all, of whom they have much the same ideas as other nations. This is, what Caesar specifies, he adds to this thing we all know, which is quite self-evident. So Apollo averts disease, Minerva teaches the elements of industry and handicrafts, and Jupiter rules the sky. So he is the great chronocrator, as we have seen, let's say, with the Greeks, with Helios, and we know that the Ptolemaists identified Helios to the Christian prophet, the Messiah, which was called also Helios, but who became known as the Christos, Jesus Christ, who was seen in antiquity, early medieval times, as the great chronocrator of the Christian faith, who ruled over the sky. And Mars presides over war, something we all know. And this he shares with, of course, Heracles. And before the battle of the before the battle, the gods generally vow all of their spoils to Mars, you know, type of things that the Romans would have to add upon this, of course. So now let's look into the Celtic matter itself. Now there were only 7 planets known or counted in antiquity, and this went for all of the different nations. Of course, the moon and the sun were added as planets, but they were still considered distinct from the wandering stars, which were the planets per se in the minds of the ancient astrologers. So if we exclude the 2 luminaries, namely the moon and the sun, only 5 planets were counted, and these were observable planets and were then taken for visitors or messengers as wandering stars. At that time, astronomy was a naked eye science, and for many centuries, the Mediterranean and Nordic peoples, mainly the Greeks, saw Venus as 2 distinct wandering bodies, astral entities or planets. But then again, some of the star-gazing astrologers speculated on the hypothetical existence of additional non-visible outer planets, and this was because of the missing count for a total of 12, which would bring it to a par for the astrological houses in order to do divining, starting from the astrological constellations and astrological signs or astrological mansions. And so up until William Herschel's discovery in 1781, the existence of Uranus was almost completely ignored. It should be noted, however, that the ancient astronomers were not completely ignorant of the existence of it, since sometimes it was visible under optimal conditions, and this, of course, was certainly in the areas around the Mediterranean Sea, where the skies were quite clear at night. This would have been in Celtiberia and the Tartessian realm, or around, let's say, the Alps mainly. Or in southern France or southern Gaul, in the Marseille region of Gaul, Marsilia. So as regards to Neptune and Pluto, their discoveries were much more recent and were perfectly unknown, perfectly in the sense that they were completely unknown to the ancients. Planet Neptune was discovered only in 1846 by Le Verrier, while Pluto, now regarded as, debased as a planetoid, was cited in 1930 by Tombaugh. More recently, on the 4th of June 2002, astronomers Michael Brown of the California Institute of Technology at Pasadena and Chadwick Trujillo identified a second planetoid orbiting the sun behind Pluto, and there were a lot more bodies around in that area past Uranus and surrounding Pluto, so it's quite a busy area. But because it's so far from the sun, we don't get to see these bodies, and they would have not been observable in antiquity, since, as mentioned, astronomy was naked eye practice, so they wouldn't have been visible in those days. And so any addition to this list would have been completely hypothetical. In those days, it would have been mythological or hypothetical in the sense that they would be imagined by the ancients in order to fill the gap. And so if we turn to the prophecies of Merlin found in Geoffrey of Monmouth, Historia Regum Britanniae, or History of the Kings of Britain, there are details of what these medieval Welsh astronomers would have understood as visible and invisible planets or wandering stars. So in the idea, under the notion of visible, there would have been the shining sun, the planet Mercury from Arcadia, the helmet of Mars, shall call to Venus, Jupiter shall emerge from its established bounds, and the star of Saturn, the chariot of the moon, shall disturb the zodiac. So this pretty much sums it up if we should quote Geoffrey of Monmouth. And then the invisible ones would be Adriana or Arianrod, the northern crown, behind the closed door, the pattern shall seek refuge in her causeway. At a stroke of the wand, the winds shall rush forth, and the dust of Wentu, the wind, shall blow on us again. So this pattern, this doorway, or this great gate, which was the in fact the gate of the winds, known by the ancients as the gate of the winds, and it was projected in the skies in the region of the constellation of Cassiopeia, in that sense. So that, you know, it pretty much brings it to a close for these notions of the wandering stars. But of course, you know, of the five, it was long a question of speculation as to what were the names of these wandering stars by the old Celts. We have in the different languages, the modern Celtic languages, many of the terms the terms derive from Latin. The Latin language. This mainly due to the Christianization process and because of the church. And so we know that the names of the planets do not correspond to the old names that we could find, let's say, in the sources, the classical sources. Of the classical sources, mainly Greek and Roman, we know only of, let's say, the Astronyms for Venus and for not Jupiter, but for Saturn, because Saturn was a very, very, very mystical planet for the ancients, especially for the ancient Celts. So if we look, let's say, if we compare the different languages, we have the moon, which in Welsh would have been Lor, and in Breton it would be Lor, and in Gaelic it would be Gelach, and then in Latin it's Luna. So the sun, it's Hall in Welsh, Heol in Breton, Grian in Gaelic. So we have Gelach and Grian are the our two Celtic names which were not Latin, of course, but this is the only two that we have which correspond to truly Celtic names. And of course, in Latin it was Sol, but the name Hil comes from Helios in Greek. Then Mars. Then we have Morthe, Mers in Breton, and Mart in or Mert in Gaelic. If I'm pronouncing it right, please tell me. Which was Mars. As for Jupiter, in Welsh we have Yaw, and then in Breton we have Yaw, And in Gaelic we have Job or Joib, and this corresponds to Jupiter or Jovis. And then for Mercury we have Mercher in Welsh, and Mercher in Breton, and Mercuire in Gaelic, and this was Mercurius in Latin. Venus was Gwener in Welsh, Gwener in Breton, exactly the same. Gwenir in Gaelic, and Venus, Veneris in Latin. Venus is the genitive of Venus. Saturn, then we have Saturn, Saturn also in Breton, Sartarn in Gaelic, and Saturnus in Latin. So when I asked Joseph Monard if there was a complete list of the Old Celtic names for the traditionally known planets, and his answer was that apart, of course, from the two luminaries, the moon and the sun, there was only Venus and Saturn. Venus was known as Ria, and Saturn known as Nocturnos, and so the nightly and Sirius, which was the slowpoke. And so the other names eventually popped up when looking at into the Book of Ballymote. As we know, the Book of Ballymote does not just list the Ogamic alphabet. It also has a whole set, a list or a catalog of different symbols and siglas and signs, which were which probably seemed very cryptic to the later folk, especially those who had been Christianized and Latinized. And so suddenly there are symbols that appear in certain lists, and one of them showed at least 7 to 9 different symbols, some without captions and some with captions. And this is what they look like. One had a crescent. This was the first one. And so we could speculate that this is the moon, so no other, let's say, a heavenly body shows that aspect in the night sky. And the second one was labeled Goak, and another had 3 strokes. They were lines that resembled the triban known to the Neo-Druids and the Welsh bards. And then you have another one, and then an intro which was labeled Tuct, T-U-C-T, and another one was L-C-T, and another one was R-I-I, and then in it, in the symbol which resembled a lightning rod or some kind, or maybe a square with a pillar, mainly a pillar, I would say. So this one was R-I-I. Re pops up very often in the Oghams as an abbreviation for different Ogamic letters or Ogamic symbols. So this was not new. And then we had Milne, and around Milne were there was N abbreviated dot, and then U-I-H. And then the other one was L-T-H. And finally, E-A-N. So if we take these for the planets, the first one, the crescent, was the moon. The second one, Goak, was Mars. The triban was the sun. Tucta was Jupiter. LCT, Mercury. RII, Venus, Ri. Milni we Saturn, Leth, the southern lunar node, the dragon's tail, and Aeon, the northern lunar node, dragon's head. That is, for moon in the Book of Ballymote, there is the entry L, L abbreviated. Of course, when we looked at that, we thought that it was referring to the Latin luna. The Brittonic lura or lugra would have been, or luxna would have been appropriate, the old Celtic luxna. But it should have been Gaelic or Gaelach without a CH maybe for the Old Irish. Then further on for Mercury, there was this other peculiarity in which we had ict, that is ICT. And first we thought it was Latin again, as with Luna, and meaning in Latin a stroke, to beat the measure, to hit, to pound. But this seemed quite, for us, not very credible, which would have been strange for a planetary name. So we opted for maybe a form in Old Celtic stemming from ictis, which is a feminine term, meaning from below, lower, yielding a masculine as ictios, I-C-T-I-O-S, for the lower one, someone of below, someone coming from below. Also punning with ichthyon, the channel. Therefore ichtios could also mean someone who channels, the channeler, or someone from the channel. So this would probably be appropriate for someone like Mercury, but Manar and I believe that it was actually, the I was an error, probably a voluntary error for L, that is I replacing L. You know, if the scribe drew the I a bit longer with the dot, it would have been an L originally, so he opted for the I, thinking it was Latin. This is a type of error we often find. So yes, most evidently, the name for Mercury would have been something like Ichtios, Lucaros, or something like that, and so meaning the planet from below, or as Mercury would be coming from around the sun and passing before the sun, would be hard to observe, but it would be easily observed from one side to another. So we finally opted for the L, replacing the I for that inscription. And Aeon, the northern lunar node, dragon's head. So if we look into the etymology of these Old Irish names, we discover that they most evidently they do pertain to heavenly bodies, the planets or wandering stars. So since the moon was not named, it would have been self-evident for the ancients, showing a crescent, and the name would have been would have naturally come to mind. But the Old Irish name was Easka, and it derives from the Old Celtic Eidskia, which was spelled E-I-D-S-C-I-I-A, which means phasing or in phase, and or many phases, and this was the regular name for the moon. Of course, there were a lot others, as we will see. Mars, Goak. Why Goak? Because it's from the old Celtic kokos, which means the red. And so the red, of course, is the planet Mars. There's no two doubt about it. And then the sun, represented by three rays for Grena. This would also have been very familiar to the Old Irish. Radiant, bright, sunny, which it means. And this was the deified. Grena was the goddess, the sun goddess. So it was the name for the deified sun. Its feminine aspects, of course, in the Brittonic, let's say British and Gaelic tradition, it was also known as male, as granos, which means the bearded or the beaming, and it would have been one of the names for Belenos or the Maponos, the Maban. And these are the three solar rays thrown by Jupiter to feed the fires of Mars, Mercury, and Venus. This is why there are three rays, and these are the three rays of the sun. And but stemming from Jupiter itself, there are at least 7 bolts or cosmic rays which are thrown by Jupiter. And so, what was the name of Jupiter? Tect, well, which was spelt with an E instead of a U, so it's just a matter of probably the scribe misspelt it, or it became mispronounced as time went by. It stems from tektos, the old Celtic name for it is tektos, which means emissary, envoy, messenger, and this was a regular name for planet in the old Celtic language or Gaelic, and there, as we have seen in epigraphy, the name tektos also appears as a in theonomy and cosmography and things like that. And so this is according to Joseph Monod. So this was a regular name for the planet as a wandering star. So tektos means someone who goes from place to place. And then there was Mercury, lect, and then L-U-C-T, and this comes from luctos or luchtos, which means bright, for assembly, gathering, troop, party, burden. Luxtos meant wanderer, and so here we have the name for wandering star, luxtos, so which was one of the names. So you had tektos and luxtos, which were names for wandering stars in Old Celtic. So here you have the two most important deities, as we have seen with Caesar's list, starting with Mercury. So we have Mercury and Jupiter, who are named after wandering stars. And then we have Venus. This was also a very widely known name in antiquity, Ri, in Old Irish, R-I-I, as mentioned. And it stems from Ria, or Reia, which was spelt either, and according to epigraphy, either R-I-I-A, or R-E-I-A, or R-E-I-I-A. And this was a common name for the morning star, or the planet Venus. And this name also appears in the Germanic languages as Freya, as the goddess Freya. So Rhea and Freya were both equivalents for the Latin or Roman Minerva. And then we have Saturn, which was the final known wandering star of the ancient Celts, the fifth. And in the Book of Ballymote, it appears as Milne, that is from melnos, M-E-L-N-O-S, which means slow, indolent, long-termed, slowpoke, because of its long planetary revolution. And then we have also in the book of Balamot we have N as an abbreviation, which is for nocturos, the nocturnal, and also the addition we, UIH, is from vosiros, which means laggard, straggler, extending, slow, exactly the same as for milni or melnos. It means exactly the same. And so the Greeks had mentioned that the Celts, who were astute astronomers and who were some of the best nations in antiquity in the fields of astronomy, that they called their planetary ruler or planetary god, they called it nocturos and vosiros, and this was the name also of the planet. And so here we have it. So the list in the book of Balamot is in complete accord with the astronyms that we have attested from classical literature and epigraphy. So as for the nodes, a peculiar aspect of ancient astronomy was that of the lunar nodes, or the serpent's head and serpent's tail. And so the self-lunar node is in the book of Balamot is labeled Leth, L-T-H, which stems from losta or losto for tail, which the complete astronym in ancient Celtic would have been losto ambeios, which means the dragon's tail. The element ean probably hints at Kean, you know, the head, which would have the C would have been deleted in order to make a pun, which was absolutely typical of the day. So this would have been something that everybody would have understood. So if we remove the Q or the C, we get Aeon, and which puns with eno, ono, liquid, or perhaps water, in wordplay with ethnos, bird, and oinos from Ean, in Old Irish Ean, E-A-N, corresponds very well to the changing element of the oceanic mercury, which is often mentioned in the British texts. And so this would bring him closer to, let's say, Cian, who would have been the father of Lu and the son of Balor, and Balor means lighteous, emitting light. So again, we have this notion of emitting light. So this has to do with the phases of the moon. You know, the loss of light and the gain of light, waxing and waning. And so the serpent's head would have been Kean, Kenos, Ambios. There goes for the names of the planets, or the wandering stars. So the luminaries, of course, you know, Belinos was the sun deified, and then you had Granos, Grena, Sawelios, Sawelia, Sonos, Sona, masculine and feminine for the sun. Usually the sun was considered as a mother, as a feminine deity, and so as the queen of the dynasty, of the solar dynasty. And then you have the moon, Diwona, the moon as a goddess, and so we have it in the calendar. So the moon would have been called in Old Celtic Diwona or Diwona, which would be the moon as a goddess. And in the Coligny calendar, this is how it appears. There you have also the mention of D1, which would have been the regular name of the moon as a celestial entity and or astral body. And then you have Luchna and Luana in Gaelic. So Luchna would have been the Old Celtic form of Luana, would have been the Gaelic evolution. And then you have Edskios or Edskion to the neuter, which would have been the phasing aspect of the moon, and Leucara, which would be the lightiest, light-emitting aspect, and Gelakos also. So for Mars, we have Kokidios, which would have been an aspect of Ogmios as Mars, or Kokos. Mercury would have been Lugus, Mercury deified, and then the names for it would have, from the Book of Ballymote, would have Luchtos, and other names by comparison, by etymology, we have Budios or Buduos. Venus is Rhea, of course, or Rhea. Jupiter is Taranis, this Jupiter deified, which the name of the planet would have been Tectos. Saturn is Arwalos, Saturn deified, and Melnos, Nucturos, Vosiros as the name of the planet. So what's important for astrology is the let's say for the yokes is to find the position of the planet as it is enumerated in the list, and which gives it the ranking. So which planet comes first gives the power of the yoke. Let's say if it's the moon that comes first, then the moon comes as number one, as is in force. So in the Irish medieval order of the planets from the Book of Ballymote, we learn that the planets are listed this way. The Moon, Mars, Sun, Jupiter, Mercury, Venus, and Saturn. As for the Welsh medieval order, mainly from the Book of Taliesin, we have Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn. In the war commentaries of Julius Caesar, as we have seen, it's Mercury, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Venus. As for the other two, Moon and Saturn, I would place Moon before Saturn, of course. And for the order of the planets according to Vedic literature, we would have Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn. And so as you can see, these lists do not diverge much from one to another. The luminaries are often placed beforehand, or depending on the power attributed to the godly ruler of the planet, the planetary ruler, then this would indicate which god has the most force, as we can see. Caesar believed that the Gauls ranked Mercury first, be above all. Then he sees it as the sun. So this would have been, let's say, the sun would have been the equivalent of Apollo or some other solar being. Then Mars, which would have been also Heracles, as forming a pair, you know, the hero and the god. And Jupiter, of course, as the main chronocrator, followed by Venus as the morning and night star, but also the lady companion of these gods, who would have also had much power in any of the conjunctions or yokes, which we will see later. And so the one thing to understand is for the ancients, the ancient Indo-Europeans, the gods, Dewoi, came from, the name comes from Deimos, light. And Deimos was the deified entity of light. So it had been a living entity, not in the biological sense, but in the animated sense. So of light, Dewo or Dewo, lightly, light emitting. And so the gods were therefore seen as celestial luminaries or lights. And this explains why the Gauls found the Greeks ridiculous when they had in their temples anthropomorphized, they had anthropomorphic representations of the gods, and these statues were often painted in very lifelike colors, so this made them even more surprising. And so for the ancients, the gods resided in a loka, as the Vedic astrologers would mention, and these were sojourns. And so, of course, the Celts had also this notion of planetary sojourns for the gods. According to the ancient astrological scheme, the yokes of the planetary or cosmic forces do not hold when under the influence of giant planets such as Jupiter and Saturn, which exert either beneficial or malevolent forces on the other planets. And so Mars and Mercury were considered active while Venus was considered passive. So nevertheless, a measure of the deterrence was envisioned. So when lightning is fired by Mars in the vicinity of Jupiter and Saturn, then the movements of other celestial bodies are set in motion. And it was imagined that these flashes seen as heavenly lights were caused by comets, in that they were believed to be the cause of lightning. And this frequency is unpredictable and can only be foreseen through meticulous observation maintained over long periods of time. And the Druids, the astronomer Druids, were very astute observers of the sky, as mentioned by the classical authors. And since it is difficult to distinguish a comet from a meteorite, their passages could only be predicted because of their constant elliptical orbits around the sun. And again, they vary in shape and appearance, so much so that the ancient astrologers simply classified them in the general category of wandering or erratic stars. So it is from the outer zones of the solar system after their passage into Jupiter's orbit that they are disturbed in their revolutions to the point as to deviate from their usual course. So this is what is mentioned in the chapter of the predictions of Merlin in the history of Britain by Monmouth. So another argument for the allocation of evil qualities given to the erratic stars was because of their alleged destructive properties. That is, they ignite, they become inflamed, and lose some of their mass as they approach the sun. In light of this, comets differed from meteorites in that, or meteors, in that they have ecliptical or hyperbolic orbits, and this wouldn't have escaped the fine observation of the ancients. So only comets run on a periodic ecliptical orbit, and the average frequency of comets is 35 or 50 years, for example. Take Halley's Comet, which visits us every 75 years. And so the ancients thought that the comets were harbingers of terrible events. They were bad omen for whoever had observed them or in which skies they are seen. So on the cosmic forces in traditional astrology, the word strength stands for power, force, and energy, especially for the Old Celtic languages. But we do find the same concept in the Vedic astrology. So including other aspects or qualities of a star or a planet. So in the enumeration of the heavenly bodies, the numeral quality of the strength of the planet falls in a given order. This order of the planets varies according to the different astrological traditions, of course. So in classical and Vedic astrology, signs are credited as having good or evil qualities. The Old Celtic names for these allotments were the following: Mata, as we have seen in the Kalini calendar, Mata for beneficial, good, and Anmata for non-beneficial or not good, bad. Some of the ancient schools of astrology favored a rule based on the qualities of the sun, while others on the aspects of the moon, and still others on Jupiter. And that these ranking orders were undoubtedly referred to as rectus in Old Celtic. As for the rectuarius was the regulator, so the celestial regulator. This would have been something Jupiter was known for. Thus, according to the accepted order, a number is assigned to each of the planets or heavenly bodies, and in some traditions, the moon was the first regulator, and accordingly, in Vedic astrology, the lunar nodes were added to the scheme. This ranking significantly has to change the allotments of the cosmic forces from one tradition to another. So from the list of the Book of Ballymote, we suspect that the Old Irish also considered the nodes as planets, as we have seen, with the last entries in the planetary symbols with Leth and Aeon. The ancient Greeks classified the planets in two categories, one assigned for the criteria of astronomy and the other for the considerations of astrology. So let's not forget that at this point, the point of view of the ancients was strictly geocentric. And this doesn't mean that the Celts did not know that the Earth was itself a sphere, since it was called the Crudni, or Crundion in Old Celtic, which means the sphere. So the ancient Celts did know that the Earth was also a sphere, as with the others. And so these orders are as follows. The orders of the planets by the Greek astronomers was first the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The Greek astrological order was, as for the astrologers, was Sun, Moon, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Mercury. And the Greek Ptolemaic order of late Alexandria in Egypt was Moon, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And for the Roman Mithraic order, we have Saturn, Sun, Moon, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, and Mercury. So the Vedic astrological ranking, along with the cosmic strengths and aspects, are as follows. Surya, the sun, stood for uniqueness, foundation, spirit, general evil, and general evil. Chandra, the moon, duality, balance, thinking, and was considered generally beneficial. Kuja, Mars, energy, action, will, and also was of a slighter evil. Buddha, Mercury, was order, balance, reason, generally beneficial. Brihaspati, or Guru, for Jupiter, represented law, education, intellect, and was greatly beneficial. Shukra, the Venus, stood for harmony, beauty, intuition, and was seen as being of slight benefit or beneficial. Shani, Saturn, control, purpose, vision, wisdom, great evil. Rahu, the northern node of the moon, duality, great dispersion, return, or greater evil. Ketu, the southern node for moon of the moon, tripling, trinity, trimurti, creation, release, and was seen as being of slighter evil. So therefore, from the Irish list from the Book of Balamot, along with the meanings we can get from the different abbreviations, we have the moon, therefore Gelach, or Gelaka from the Old Celtic Gelaka, or Old Gaelic, clear, milky white. Goak, Mars, Kokos, red. Grian, sun. Grena, light, radiant. Tuct, Jupiter, Tectos, an emissary, an ambassador, someone who is sent. Therefore, if we go for Ict, or Ictis, or Ictios, we have someone coming from below, or looked. The planetary body, Mercury, Luctos, troop, party, light. Ri, for Venus, from Rhea. We have free, free roving. Milni, slow, lazy, sluggish, indolent, from Melnos, of course. Ear, Ean, the tail, lunar node. Ersa, Ambeos, which would have been the dragon's tail. And then we have Ean, the head, the northern node for the moon, which was from Kenos Ambeos, the dragon's head. So here is my proposal for a Gaelic ranking after the Roman interpretation. So of course the moon takes 3 forces, but it comes in first, ranked first. So it starts with the first force and ends with the last 2 forces with the lunar nodes. So that the moon takes 3, then Mercury takes 2, the sun takes 3, Mars takes 5, Jupiter takes 6, and Venus takes 7. So if we are to follow from the book of Taliesin, we have Sun, Moon, Mars, Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 forces, malevolent or benevolent, for these planets. So this is for the acuity now of the planets. So from this cosmic drama scripted from the myths, we know that many of the deities and heroes acted as heavenly bodies, and thanks to these myths we can guess that what role these gods played in the cosmic, in this great cosmic drama, or this cosmic play. That is, what were their relationships, their interactions, and here, this is where we get the conjunctions and how these conjunctions create yokes, and so for each of the planets. So when one of these planets would enter under the influence of another, then it would be subjugated to that force. So it would come under the influence of, let's say, one of the dominant planets. So since the old Celtic lexicon was very rich in astronomical vocabulary, so if we look at the classical Greek and Roman parallels with the Vedic, we notice that, for example, in Sanskrit, the word yoga for yoke, or yugam in Latin, or Greek zygon, had its equivalent as yugon in Old Celtic. And so this is what we can infer. And then we have the forces. The conjunction of two luminaries or heavenly bodies was called amba in Sanskrit and ambo in Old Celtic. This is seen on the Kalini calendar. So we have two terms that are very, very, very close. Other cognates are the Sanskrit bala for force and Celtic bala for charge, weight. And the Sanskrit word was used as follows to name many astronomical concepts. Amza bala, due to the force of the Earth's longitude. Chara bala, force due to nature. Shira bala, force due to the presence of one or more planets in an astrological sign. And the name bala in Sanskrit for strength, power, had many Celtic equivalents apart from bala also, such as briga, power, gala, force, power, strength of mind, nertos, bodily force, might, sego, prevalence, stertis, resilience and strength and endurance, and wallos, harmful force, overpowering strength. And so this can be seen in the Sanskrit terminology for the yokes in astrology and Vedic astrology, such as rasi bala, strength of evidence, rasi dasa, prevalence period of an astral sign, rasi vridi, gain or increase of a sign, rasi hrasa, debilitation, reduction or collapse of a sign. So when comparing these Sanskrit expressions with those of the Gaelic Kalini calendar, we get Ogmiu, sharp constellation, Tratus, time lapse of a zodiacal sign, Ludexio or Ludixtio, an astronomical rising and ascent, waxing, such as Prinios Ludexio from the Book of Kalini, ascending constellation, Lagiato, fall descent of a constellation, Prinios Lagiato, failing descent of a constellation. And so here are the following strengths for the planets, following our Irish and Breton lists. If we compare them both, we come to this conclusion here. The moon plus the lunar nodes is 1 plus 8 equals 9. Mars equals 2. Sun 3. Jupiter 4. Mercury 5. Venus and Saturn 6 and 7. These are the yokes for the planets. And so if we are to look into the this astrological model, this Celtic astrological model, we have Yugon Gelakai, yoke of the moon, Gala, moral, might, bravery, storm, strength, oinos, one, ointu, unit, cohesion, planetary ruler, Medwa, Medba, Mave, drunkenness, mystical sense, Meda, balance, measure, Mana, thinking, mind, Menania, thought, Mentio, thought, Mena, desire, Mentos, project, Manda, residence, mansion. And then you have for the zodiac, its sign mainly where it is the most strong is in Cancer with Wilios or Wilos, horse, Wilia, desire and will. So this, and also Wilos is for pony. As for the self-lunar node, we have Yugon Ersa Ambeos, yoke of the dragon's tail, and the strength is Octu, 8. Octo Nox, weak. Planetary ruler, Kermatis, the sorb, also referred to as the honey-mouthed. And then you have mystical sense, Ersakos, the tail, the behind, the appendix, Kamarios, the opposite hand. And then you have Kormogan, prophet, Komarta, compassion, comparison and comparative impression. The zodiac is, in the zodiac it's Libra in conjunction with the south node as an aspect of Mercury. As for the northern lunar node, we have the yoke is Yugan Kenos Ambeos, the yoke of the dragon's tail, strength Nuan 9, planetary ruler is Bo Deg, Dergos Boduos, the red crow. And so in the mystical sense, it's Derka aspect, Dexma, sense of vision, Dexmen, faculty of vision, Kakriya, the vortex, the spiral, or the chakra. And then we have Kernio, victory. And this, the north lunar node in the zodiac where it gets its major strength is in Scorpio as an aspect of Mars. And then we have the yoke, Yugan Koki, yoke of the red, strength, Duo, Wo, 2, planetary ruler, Agma, Ogmios, the mystical champion, or the one with the magical grip, or Kumal, Kamulos, dynamic. And then mystic sense is Aiden, fervor, zeal, Awila, Wila, will. And then you have the astrological signs for Mars are Aries, Aros, Mars, Siltarios, Samonios, the sower. And for the sun, the yoke is Grenai Yugan, the yoke of the beaming one, strength, Tris, 3, or 3, planetary rulers, Bile, Belios, Clear, Angus, Macaque, Oinoigustio, Ogios Mapos, the first choice, the young sun, and of course Grain, or Grian, from Grena, Sunny, the sun goddess, mystical sense, Grensman, advanced progress, Anao, harmony, and Anatio, spirit, and Atman, soul. And we find its major forces in Leo, Aga, the doe. And then we have Jupiter. The yoke is Tekti Yugan, the yoke of the envoy or the emissary. Strength is Keteor, 4. And the planetary ruler is Dagda, Dagodevos, the good Lord. Eoched, Yiwokatos, a good or strong warrior, or the Yu fighter. Ruat, Rofesa, or Rudios Ruesos, the red of great knowledge. Mystical sense, Tecto, Tectu, possession, custody, Tectos, traveler, envoy, messenger. Carantia, friendship, Lutu, passion, Kesla, intelligence, thinking, understanding, Werkantlo, education, instruction. And the astrological signs for Jupiter is Sagittarius, Bogdarios, the archer, Pisces, Escoi, the fish. Now for Mercury, the yoke is Lukti, Yugan, the yoke of the burden. The strength is Quenque, 5. Planetary ruler is Lu, Lugus, the splendid. Mystical sense, Luktos, Luchtos, part, burden, charge, bunch, party, people, or kondo, understanding, intelligence, meaning. And the astrological signs he is most powerful in is Virgo, which is Echo, the country priest, Gemini, Rudiosukoi, the red pigs. Now we have Venus. The yoke is Riai Yugan, yoke of the free, strength, Swech, 6, planetary ruler, Bridget, Brigantia or Brigindo, nobility, Dana, Danu or Danua, impetuous, vehement. The mystical sense is Briga, value, power, might, insolence. Brigantia, lofty, moral elevation, greatness of the soul. Canieto, beauty. Kerda, art. Koimo, love, kindness. Kamruto, emotion. Etana, poetry. And for the astrological sign where Venus is the most prevalent is in Taurus, Skiatos Ander, the winged ox. Libra is Indualikon, the ring of the ultimate circle. Saturn, the yoke is Melni Yugan,
strength, sechan, 7. Planetary ruler, nuada, nodens, the angler, brestos, the broken, impetuous, split, cracked one, crackpot, or brestos, or bretsos, the beautiful one, which gives him quite an ambivalence. Mystical sense, uncommon, loss of memory, amnesia, amaro, sorrow, grief, and kaos, death, ankena, hard necessity, fatality, violent coercion, or any form of violence, cassia, violent passion, delegnis, or delegnis, dis, or dits, or ditos, for the genitive, annihilation, destruction. The astrological signs in which Saturn is most prevalent is Atiluis, the sturgeon, Riuiri, Prinios, Aquarius, Udeskiosos, Aqueous, or Wisukios or Wiskeos, the raven. Of course, many of the strengths and things are inspired from the Breton long poem entitled Ranu, the series, or the Druid and the Child, which was a famous 19th century folk tale, which was, or poem, which was recorded in the Bazars Braise, of Villemarque. And so this about sums it for the forces and yokes. And so just to conclude, let's say Briga is strong, more or less beneficial or slightly beneficial. That's Moon, Mars, Sun. Mata, auspicious or beneficial, is Jupiter, Mercury, Venus. And Mata, which is harmful or not benevolent, non-auspicious or evil, you have Caput Draconis, dragon's head, Cauda Draconis, dragon's tail, and Saturn. So notice that Saturn and the dragon are coupled for Anmata. And then you have Lagus, or vile, greatly evil. So you have, let's say, the anti-earth, which was also a domain, a loka, as the Vedic peoples would say, which would have been, let's say, an anti-planet in the scheme of things. It would have been one of the additional planets to our list of planets. So the counter-Earth would also be called there was also the other sign, the pattern. So the black moon in today's astrology, which would, in conjunction with Taurus and Uranus, would create a yoke of three, which would be the untimely or not beneficial aspect that would be found with, let's say, the dragon. Also note that prior to modern times, again, Uranus was not known as a planet and was perceived as one of the epiphanies of Mercury, since it appeared and disappeared at whim. So Mercury for the Celts was Lu, or Lugus, the messenger of the gods. And so he's pictured in Celtic coinage, Gaelic coinage, as a winged anthropomorphic being, half bird and half human. And as for in classical mythology, he's seen as more as a flighty person, so his feet are winged. He wears winged sandals or has wings to his feet. It is not certain whether the ancient Celts knew had the astrological concept of a dark moon. So it seems to be a later addition to classical astrology. However, the mention of the door occurring in the Northern Crown and and the moon hints at a dark spot in Taurus, which was only known by the ancient astronomers and not known to the more recent astronomers. So the plural form of yokes in Old Celtic was yuga, And the yugas are combinations of planetary conjunctions that occur in the sign of the zodiac, in the signs of the zodiac. And the significator is a measure of power or strength given to each of these yokes according to the combinations and conjunctions of the planets entering the astral house. Also, the significator indicates the strength given to the yokes when the sun enters or leaves an astral or lunar mansion. For a house, cusp is the ascendant, and the second cusp is the descendant. So in the scheme of things in Celtic astrology, we have an entering cusp and an outing cusp. So as for the ruling master, as he enters the mansion and as the domain and exits the domain, since the signs were not of equal measure. And so this pretty much sums it up for our notion of planets, planetary heroes, planetary gods, and significators, yokes, and forces in Celtic astrology.